Over the last 2 weeks, I deliberately studied National Planning Framework, the NPPF, not as a planner, but as a developer who wants predictable outcomes. I wasn't reading for interesting commentary. I was reading for what changes decisions, what changes approvals, refusals, appeals, pricing risk, and land control. What I learned is simple but uncomfortable. Planning isn't merely about opinion, it's about structured, legal, and policy tests. When you understand that test, you stop guessing and you start building cases that are hard to refuse and easy to defend. I am going to share what I learned in 5 parts. NPPF is not guidance in the casual sense, it's a material lever. Planning applications are determined in line with the development plan unless material consideration indicates otherwise. The NPPF is one of the strongest material considerations. What that means in reality is this. The local plan is the starting point, but it is not always the finishing point. Local plan is weak, old, or failing on delivery. NPPF becomes the steering wheel. So I learned to stop treating the NPPF as a background reading and start treating it as a decision tool. Every planning decision runs in 3-part engine. Is that planning decisions rest on 3 elements. First, the development plan, which is the local plans and neighborhood plans set as the baseline. Material consideration. This is where NPPF comes in, alongside evidence, housing supply, highways, flood risk, heritage, and also appeal decision as persuasive precedent. Third, the planning balance. It benefits. Second, benefits are identified, harms are identified, and then they are weighed. This is important because refusals collapsed at appeal for one reason. The harms were asserted, not evidenced, and the balancing exercise was weak. So I learned to structure every scheme around benefit versus harm and to force that weighing to happen explicitly. Paragraph 11 is the most powerful approval and appeal mechanism. If there is one section I studied the hardest, it was paragraph 11, the presumption in favor of sustainable development. I learned what it really does. It creates an approval bias when relevant policies are missing or out of date. In housing cases, it is commonly triggered when the council cannot show a robust 5-year housing land supply or delivery is failing under the housing delivery test, especially below 75%. And then the test becomes very clear. Permission should be granted unless protected policies provide a strong reason to refuse, or the harm significantly and demonstratively outweighs the benefit. That wording matters. That's significantly and demonstratively. It is not a casual phrase. It raises the bar for refusal. So what I learned is this. When paragraph 11 applies, your job is to make benefits measurable and harms narrow, evidenced, and limited. Another major learning, not all policies carry the same weight all the time. Weight can depend on the age of the plan. It can depend on the strength of the evidence base. It can also depend on consistency with NPPF and even performance on housing delivery. Local plans should be reviewed at least every 5 years. When plans are old and housing delivery is weak, a restrictive policy often lose weight. I also learned that prematurity refusals are rare, and emerging plans usually get limited weight depending on their stage and objections. This changed my whole approach. Instead of treating policy as fixed, I learned to assess policy strength like a risk rating. Design is not decoration. I will say it again. Design is not decoration. It is a multiplier that can save or sink a scheme. Before studying the NPPF, many people treat design as branding. The NPPF treats design as policy. Good design must respond to character without blocking change. Function will, over time, promote safety and inclusion and optimize site potential. The practical lesson is blunt. Poor design can kill a strong policy case, and good design can rescue a marginal one. So I learned to treat design as part of the planning argument, not a separate exercise. I also learned the hard stop areas. Flood risk must follow a sequential approach. Development must be safe for its lifetime and not increase risk elsewhere. Swords are expected unless inappropriate. Irreplaceable habits receive very strong protection. Heritage carries great weight in conversation. Harm must be clearly justified and weighed against public benefit. This taught me discipline. You don't fall in love with a site until you test the fatal constraints. How developers use the NPPF in the real world: hunt, score, control. Finally, I learned the developer operating system. For example, land sourcing, target council with old plans, weak housing supply, poor housing delivery tests or HDT, and high appeal loss rate. That's where policy condition create opportunity. In site sourcing, you use a structured model: policy strengths, site fundamentals, sustainability, design potential, appeal defensibility, so you don't waste time on bad ops. In land control, negotiate risk, not price. Use option agreements and discipline structure so you don't tie up capital before consent. And I studied work examples that showed this pattern clearly. A council with out-of-date plan and a poor head DT refuses at committee, but the scheme succeeds appeal under paragraph 11 because the harm case is weak and benefits are clear. What I did learn actually from studying this NPPF is, one, I learned that NPPF is not a theoretical document, it is a control system. If you can diagnose policy framework properly, if you can trigger and use paragraph 11 correctly, quantify benefits, evidence and narrow harms, treat design as policy, and manage committee refusals without damaging appeal, then planning stops being gambling and becomes a process you can prize and win. That is what I learned. And that is the framework I will use going forward as I pursue development sites and planning permissions. Thank you for listening and thank you for watching.